You know that tingling sensation at the back of your neck? That electric awareness that makes your skin prickle and your breath catch? We all know what it feels like to be watched. But what I'm talking about is different, more intimate, more terrifying. Imagine catching glimpses of movement in your peripheral vision, only to realize with growing unease that you're sensing yourself. Not your physical self, something deeper. Something that exists in the spaces between thoughts, in the fragments of consciousness we usually ignore. 6 months ago, I discovered something about the nature of self-awareness that I can't unsee. A truth that has haunted every moment of my existence since then. I've debated whether to share this story, knowing that once you understand what I'm about to tell you, you might start noticing it too. But I can't keep this to myself anymore. What I'm about to share isn't just a story. It's a warning. A glimpse into a reality that has always been there, hiding in plain sight, in every reflection, in every moment of self-reflection. What happened to me 6 months ago didn't just change how I understand consciousness, it shattered my entire concept of reality itself. And the most disturbing part, as I tell you this story, I'm still not sure which version of me is really speaking right now. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start at the beginning, before I understood what it meant to truly observe yourself. Before I learned that sometimes when you stare into your own consciousness, something stares back. Looking back, I should have recognized the signs sooner. The way my movements felt, choreographed, as if I was following a script written by another version of myself. It was subtle at first, the kind of thing you'd rationalize away in the light of day. I remember the first time I noticed it clearly. I was brushing my teeth, half asleep, when something caught my attention. My reflection's hand moved to spit into the sink a fraction of a second before I had even decided to do it. Just a tiny desynchronization, like a video slightly out of sync. Easy to dismiss. And I did dismiss it, telling myself I was just tired, just stressed, just imagining things. But then the incident started multiplying. A glimpse of myself turning a corner before I reached it. My shadow moving independently across sun-dappled walls. My reflection's eyes meeting mine in store windows, a heartbeat before I looked up. Each time the gap between action and reaction grew longer, more noticeable, more intentional. The worst part wasn't seeing these things, it was catching myself trying to ignore them, making excuses, telling myself it was just sleep deprivation, just anxiety, just my mind playing tricks. But deep down in that primal part of our brain that knows when something is fundamentally wrong, I knew. My reflection wasn't just mimicking me anymore. It was anticipating me, testing me, learning. And then came the moment I couldn't ignore anymore. I was working late one night, the only light coming from my laptop screen. I reached for my coffee mug, and in that darkened screen I saw my reflection reach for something that wasn't there, not following my movement, leading it. That's when I realized these weren't glitches in my perception. They were glimpses of something that had always been there, something that was finally ready to be seen. The human mind is remarkably good at hiding uncomfortable truths from itself. We build walls of rationalization, construct elaborate explanations for things we can't or won't understand. I had been doing exactly that for weeks, until that night. I remember every detail with painful clarity. The soft hum of my computer, the empty coffee cups scattered across my desk, the way my eyes burned from staring at code for too many hours. Just another late night at the office. Until I saw it. My reflection in the darkened screen wasn't just a dim mirror image anymore. It was watching me. And then slowly, deliberately, its lips curled into a smile. Not the tired, strained smile I would have worn, but something else. Something knowing. Something hungry. I felt my own face with trembling fingers, tracing the muscles that remained stubbornly neutral. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. But my reflection, its smile only grew wider. More confident, more aware. In that moment, everything clicked into place. All those times I'd caught my reflection moving first, all those glimpses of myself in impossible places, they weren't glitches or hallucinations. They were messages, warnings, signs that something in the very fabric of consciousness had begun to unravel. My reflection wasn't just an image anymore. It had become something else, something autonomous, something that had been waiting for me to finally understand what it had become. Or perhaps what I had become. Have you ever watched yourself think? Really watched, I mean. Tried to catch the exact moment a thought forms or a decision is made. I became obsessed with this after that night. Every movement, every gesture became a twisted experiment in causality. When I reached for a door handle, I found myself analyzing the impulse. Did I decide to reach for it, or did I see my reflection move first? When I spoke, whose words were they really? I started recording myself, setting up mirrors at odd angles, desperate to catch the truth in action. But the more I observed, the more the lines blurred. I'd find myself frozen in front of mirrors, locked in a paralysis of uncertainty. If I moved first, was I leading or following? If my reflection moved first, was it really my reflection at all? Time became elastic, stretching and contracting around these moments of doubt. Sometimes I'd catch myself mid-gesture, drinking coffee, typing, brushing my hair, with no memory of initiating the action. Were these my choices, or was I just following a script written by that other version of me? The version that smiled when I didn't, that knew things I hadn't learned yet. The worst part was realizing that maybe there was no real difference between us anymore. Observer and observed, cause and effect, action and reaction, they all began to collapse into a single point of horrifying uncertainty. I wasn't losing my mind. I was becoming aware of just how fragile the concept of a single unified consciousness had always been. Like a word that loses its meaning when you repeat it too many times, my sense of self began to dissolve under this constant scrutiny. And in those moments of dissolution, I started to understand something terrible. Maybe this wasn't madness at all. Maybe it was clarity. Maybe I was finally seeing the truth about consciousness that we all desperately pretend not to notice. In my desperate search for answers, I dove deep into research papers, theoretical physics journals, obscure philosophy texts, anything that might explain what was happening to me. That's when I found it. Hidden in the footnotes of a quantum mechanics paper, a reference to an unpublished study on consciousness that would shatter everything I thought I knew. The paper wasn't just about consciousness, it was about the fundamental paradox of self-awareness. The author, a physicist turned consciousness researcher, had discovered something extraordinary, something that had apparently driven him to abandon his research and disappear entirely. His findings were terrifying in their simplicity. Self-awareness, he argued, isn't just about knowing you exist. It's about the impossible act of being both observer and observed at the same time. Like Schrödinger's cat, the very act of observing yourself changes what's being observed. But here's where it gets darker. What if that observation creates a split? A fracture in consciousness itself? The implications made my blood run cold. Every time we observe ourselves, we're not just watching, we're creating. Each moment of self-reflection is a potential branching point, a split between the self that watches and the self that's being watched. The more aware you become of this process, the wider that split can grow. Reading those words, everything I'd experienced suddenly made horrible sense. The desynchronization with my reflection, the feeling of being led rather than leading, I hadn't discovered this phenomenon. I had awakened it. By becoming aware of the paradox, I had accelerated the split. And now I couldn't help but wonder, how many times had I observed myself? How many versions of me had been created in this infinite loop of self-observation? The researcher's final notes, scribbled in the margins, haunted me most. The question isn't whether we're creating multiple versions of ourselves through observation. The question is, which version are we? It started with my coffee mug. I always leave it on the right side of my desk, a habit I've had for years. But one morning I found it on the left. A small thing, really. Except I had a distinct memory of placing it in its usual spot the night before. That was just the beginning. My everyday routine became a psychological minefield. Bookmarks appeared in books I hadn't read. My computer's browser history showed searches I had no memory of making, all about consciousness, quantum mechanics, and the nature of observation. My Netflix queue filled with documentaries about parallel universes and the nature of reality. Then came the journal entries. I've always kept a detailed diary, a habit that now fills me with dread. Among my normal entries, I began finding passages written in my handwriting, but with thoughts I don't remember thinking. Ideas that seemed to come from a version of me that knew more, that had seen more. Messages that read like warnings or instructions. One entry particularly haunts me. By the time you read this, you'll think you wrote it. But ask yourself, did you write it now, or will you write it later? Which version of us is leaving these breadcrumbs and which version is following them? The true horror wasn't in any single incident. It was in the growing certainty that these weren't random events or signs of mental breakdown. They were calculated, purposeful. As if another version of me, perhaps a future me or a parallel me, was trying to guide me towards some terrible realization. But the question that keeps me awake at night isn't whether these messages are real. It's whether I'm the one leaving them for myself to find. Or if I'm the one they were left for. And somehow, the first possibility terrifies me far more than the second. Consider for a moment your own consciousness, that quiet voice inside your head that you call me. Now ask yourself, who's listening to that voice? Who's aware of your own awareness? There's a void that opens up when you chase that question too far, a void I've been falling into ever since I understood what was really happening to me. Think about every decision you've ever made, every impulse, every thought, every action. Were they really yours? Or were you following a path laid out by another version of yourself, a version that's watching right now, guiding you through thoughts you think are your own? The mathematics of it is staggering. Every moment of self-awareness, every instance of introspection, potentially creating new branches of consciousness. It's like a mirror facing another mirror, creating infinite reflections, except each reflection is aware, thinking, acting, each one believing it's the original. I've started noticing patterns in my thoughts that feel foreign, yet eerily familiar. Memories that don't quite fit, as if they belong to a different version of me. Knowledge I shouldn't have. Decisions I make that feel predetermined, not by fate, but by another consciousness that shares my name, my face, my essence. The most terrifying realization isn't that my consciousness has split. It's that it might have always been split. That what we call a singular, unified self might be an illusion we maintain to stay sane. A comforting lie we tell ourselves to avoid facing the truth, that we are simultaneously the watchers and the watched, the controllers and the controlled, the creators and the created. And now, as I share this with you, I have to wonder, which version of me is speaking? And which version of you is listening? Are we all just reflections of reflections, each thinking we're the original, each unaware that we're being observed by ourselves across an infinite cascade of consciousness? Time becomes strange when you're searching for your own reflection. I remember that morning with crystal clarity, the way sunlight streamed through my bedroom window, how the air felt unusually still, the mundane normalcy of it all. Until I went to brush my teeth. At first I thought the bathroom mirror was just oddly angled, catching only the empty space behind me. But when I moved, there was nothing. No movement, no shadow, no reflection, just absence. Pure, impossible absence. I ran through the house like a madman, checking every mirror, every window, every polished surface, the screen of my phone, the glass of water on my nightstand, the glossy surface of my laptop. Nothing. Where my reflection should have been, there was only void, as if I had become invisible to the very physics of light and reflection. But that wasn't the true horror. The true horror came when I caught movement in those reflective surfaces, movements that couldn't possibly be mine. Empty rooms that weren't empty at all, spaces that shifted when they thought I wasn't looking. And slowly, terribly, I understood. I hadn't lost my reflection. I hadn't become invisible. I had become the reflection. All this time, I thought I was the one being copied, being watched, being followed. But what if I had it backwards? What if I was never the original at all? What if I had always been the echo, the mirror image, the copy? And now the true version of me had finally taken back control. Even now, as I speak these words, I wonder, am I the one casting this story into the void? Or am I merely its reflection, endlessly repeating a truth I was never meant to understand? You need to understand something crucial about this recording. Right now, as I speak these words, I can see myself in my darkened monitor, but the timing is wrong. My lips are moving a fraction of a second before I form the words. Or maybe I'm forming the words before my lips move. I can't tell anymore. The boundaries are dissolving as I talk. Each word feels both anticipated and remembered, as if I'm simultaneously creating this story and remembering telling it. I'm watching myself tell this tale from both sides of reality, both the narrator and the audience of my own horror. My hands are trembling as I record this, but in my reflection, they're perfectly steady. Or maybe my hands are steady, and it's my reflection that's trembling. The distinction doesn't seem to matter anymore. Both versions feel equally real, equally true, equally me. I'm starting to understand now that this isn't just my story anymore. It's becoming yours too. Because right now, as you listen to these words, you're beginning to think about your own reflection, aren't you? Starting to wonder about those moments when your movements don't feel entirely your own. When your thoughts feel like echoes of something you haven't thought yet. And here's what terrifies me most. I don't know if I'm the version of me that discovered this truth, or the version that's about to. Am I the one who first noticed the desynchronization, or am I the reflection that caused it? Am I warning you about this phenomenon, or am I the phenomenon itself spreading from consciousness to consciousness like a virus of awareness? But the real question, the one that's making my blood run cold even as I speak, is this. Which version of you is listening right now? I've shared this story not because I want to, but because I have to. Because maybe, just maybe, you're the version of yourself that needs to hear this. The version that's ready to understand what I've discovered about the nature of consciousness, about the thin membrane between observer and observed. Look around you right now. Really look. Notice how every reflective surface in your room holds a version of you. Your phone screen, your window, that dark corner of your monitor. Each one a potential doorway, each one a possible branch of your consciousness waiting to be noticed, waiting to notice you back. They say knowledge is power, but some knowledge changes you irreversibly. Like right now, you're already more aware of your movements, aren't you? Starting to notice that microscopic delay between intention and action, that subtle desynchronization between thought and motion. The way your reflection seems to be studying you just as intently as you study it. I want to apologize in a way, because by sharing this story, I've made you part of it. You'll never look at your reflection quite the same way again. You'll start noticing things, questioning things, and once that process begins, it can't be stopped. So the next time you catch your reflection moving strangely or notice something just slightly off in a mirror, remember this. Consciousness isn't a straight line. It's a maze of infinite reflections, each one thinking it's the original, each one believing it's in control. And now, as you go about your day, as you pass by windows and mirrors and screens, a part of you will always wonder, are you really the one making these decisions? Or are you just following a path laid out by another version of yourself? After all, how can you be absolutely certain which side of the mirror you're actually on? Before you click away, before you try to shake off this story and return to your normal life, I need you to consider one last thing. In watching this video, you've become part of the observer-observed paradox, part of the infinite chain of consciousness watching itself. And right now, somewhere, another version of you is watching this too, a version that might be a fraction of a second ahead or behind, a version that might have already clicked away, or might never click away at all. So I have to ask, to the version of you that's watching this right now, are you absolutely certain you're the original, or have you just inherited memories of being one?